There was a time when Borders Books was the place you went to lose yourself for hours. You walked through those glass doors and the smell hit you first. Coffee from the cafe, that particular scent of new paperbacks, the faint hum of conversations about literature and life. The stores were massive. 25,000 square feet of pure discovery. Books stacked floor to ceiling, comfortable chairs scattered throughout, and a music section that could rival any record store. People didn't just shop at Borders, they lived there. Students studying for finals, book clubs meeting over lattes, couples browsing the bestseller wall on Saturday afternoons. I remember this. You probably do too. So, what happened to the bookstore chain that defined how America discovered books for an entire generation? By the late 1990s, Borders wasn't just a bookstore, it was a cultural institution. The company operated over 1,200 stores across the United States and internationally. $4.1 billion in annual revenue. 35,000 employees. These weren't your grandfather's cramped bookshops with dusty shelves and grumpy owners. Borders superstores averaged 25 to 30,000 square feet. They were destinations. You could spend an entire Saturday afternoon there and never get bored. The cafe served real espresso drinks before Starbucks was on every corner. The music section took up entire walls, with listening stations where you could preview albums before buying. They hosted author readings, book clubs, poetry nights. Some locations stayed open until midnight because people simply didn't want to leave. Next week, I have another story for you that I think you are going to find just as fascinating. Subscribe so you do not miss it. The genius of Borders was understanding that books weren't just products. They were experiences, discovery, the thrill of finding an author you had never heard of, recommended by a bookseller who actually knew literature. Parents brought their children for story time. Teenagers hung out in the young adult section, discovering the books that would shape their worldview. College students claimed tables near the philosophy section as their personal study halls. This was the third place that sociologists talk about. Not home, not work, but somewhere in between. Somewhere that felt like community. What made Borders special wasn't just the atmosphere. It was the brain behind the operation. Back in 1971, two brothers named Tom and Louis Borders were graduate students at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. They weren't just book lovers. They were computer science pioneers who saw the future of retail before anyone else. While other bookstore owners relied on gut instinct and publisher recommendations, the Borders brothers built something revolutionary. A computerized inventory system that could track every single book sold, predict customer preferences, and optimize selection for specific locations. This was 1971. Most businesses were still using paper ledgers and cash registers. The Borders system could tell you that customers in college towns bought more philosophy and poetry, while suburban stores moved more romance novels and business books. It could predict seasonal trends, identify emerging authors before they hit the bestseller lists, and ensure that the right books were always on the right shelves. By the 1990s, this data-driven approach had evolved into something even more sophisticated. Borders knew their customers better than their customers knew themselves. The system could track your purchasing history, recommend new releases based on your preferences, and even predict when you might return to the store. Music became a crucial part of this equation. CDs generated 15 to 20% of total revenue. The high margins on music helped subsidize book operations and drew in customers who might never have come for literature alone. Entire sections dedicated to jazz, classical, alternative rock. Borders wasn't just competing with Barnes & Noble, they were competing with Tower Records and Virgin megastores. But beneath the surface, something was already changing. In 2001, Borders made a decision that would haunt them for the next decade. Instead of building their own e-commerce website like Barnes & Noble was doing, they outsourced their online sales to Amazon.com. Think about that for a moment. Borders was essentially handing their digital customers to the company that would eventually destroy them. While Barnes & Noble customers went to BN.com, Borders customers were being trained to shop on Amazon. The logic seemed sound at the time. Amazon had the infrastructure. They had the technology. Why reinvent the wheel when you could focus on what Borders did best? Physical retail. But what Borders' leadership didn't understand was that they weren't just outsourcing e-commerce. They were outsourcing their future. Amazon wasn't just selling books online. They were learning everything about digital customer behavior, building recommendation algorithms, and developing the logistics network that would eventually dominate all of retail. Meanwhile, Borders remained focused on their superstores, convinced that the browsing experience could never be replicated online. Do you remember Borders books? What's your memory? The first real warning signs came from an unexpected source: music. The industry that had been subsidizing Borders' book operations was about to collapse. Apple launched iTunes in 2003. Napster and file-sharing networks were already devastating CD sales. But Borders had built their expansion on music profits. Those high-margin CDs that helped pay for the massive square footage and extensive staff were becoming obsolete faster than anyone anticipated. Between 2005 and 2008, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. CD sales didn't just decline, they fell off a cliff. Industry-wide, sales dropped 45% in just 3 years. iTunes and illegal downloading had made physical music stores largely irrelevant. That revenue stream that had been propping up Borders' book business? Gone. Then came November 27th, 2007. Amazon launched the Kindle for $399. The ebook revolution had begun. This wasn't just another gadget. It was an existential threat to everything Borders represented. The very idea of browsing physical books, of discovering new authors by wandering through aisles, was suddenly old-fashioned. Amazon, the same company handling Borders' online sales, was now digitizing their core product. The timing couldn't have been worse. In 2007, private equity investors led by Bennett LeBeau acquired Borders for $1.2 billion. A leveraged buyout that loaded the company with massive debt just as the financial crisis was about to devastate consumer spending. The signs were there. They always are. By 2008, the recession was crushing discretionary spending. Books and music were luxuries that families could no longer afford. Holiday sales that year were a disaster. In December, Borders announced the closure of 200 Walden Books stores. These were their smaller mall locations, but the symbolism was clear. The company was contracting, not expanding. 11,000 employees lost their jobs in that first wave. The same employees who had made Borders special. The booksellers who knew literature, who could recommend the perfect novel for a rainy Sunday afternoon. They were being replaced by part-time workers and automated systems. Borders made one last desperate attempt to save itself. In 2009, they partnered with a Canadian company called Kobo to launch their own e-reader device. Too little, too late. Amazon already owned the market. The Kobo captured less than 2% market share. It was like bringing a knife to a gunfight that had already been lost. February 16th, 2011. After 40 years in business, Borders filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. $1.29 billion in debt. 200 stores closed immediately. 11,000 more employees were laid off. The liquidation sales began within days. Everything must go. Fixtures, furniture, even the bookshelves themselves. I walked into a Borders during their closing sale. The energy was completely different. Instead of the warm community feeling, there was something hollow about it. Customers weren't browsing anymore. They were scavenging, looking for deals on books they might never read. The staff who remained were tired, demoralized. They spent their days fielding questions about when the store would finally close instead of talking about literature. By summer, it was clear that no buyer would emerge to save the company. The final Borders store closed on September 18, 2011. Ann Arbor, Michigan, the same city where Tom and Louis Borders had opened their first location 40 years earlier. Employees and regular customers gathered for the final closing. Some had tears in their eyes. This wasn't just a business closing. It was the end of an era in American culture. The death of a place where communities had gathered to discover books, to share ideas, to simply exist in the presence of literature and learning. The complete collapse of Borders resulted in approximately 40,000 job losses. Retail employees, warehouse workers, corporate staff. One of the largest retail closures in United States history. But the human cost goes beyond the numbers. These were career booksellers who had dedicated their lives to connecting readers with authors, to building community around literature. And that is the part that still gets me. Something unexpected happened after Borders disappeared. Independent bookstores, which many thought were extinct, began growing for the first time in decades. The American Booksellers Association reported membership increases of 5 to 10% annually from 2012 through 2015. Turns out that readers missed the personal service, the curated selections, the sense of community that only local bookstores could provide. Barnes & Noble survived by learning from Borders' mistakes. They kept their online platform in-house. They invested heavily in their Nook e-reader. They were willing to cannibalize their own physical sales to compete in the digital space. Could Borders have survived? Honestly, I think so. But it would have required the one thing their leadership refused to do until it was too late. Change. The same data-driven innovation that made them pioneers in the 1970s could have made them leaders in the digital age. Instead, they clung to a business model that was already obsolete. What we lost when Borders closed wasn't just a place to buy books. We lost spaces for serendipitous discovery. The browsing experience where you found books you never would have searched for online. We lost the shared cultural experience of being surrounded by thousands of stories, waiting to be discovered. Some things, once gone, never come back. Remember, this video is for educational purposes only. Always do your own research. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, subscribe to Arthur Lee's Adventures. And let me know in the comments what you remember about Borders books. Thanks for watching.